Nancy Hogshead-Makar is an Olympic champion, a civil rights lawyer, the CEO of Champion Women, a nonprofit providing legal advocacy for girls and women in sports. So nice to have you here. Is it true that not only did you win 3 gold medals and 1 silver, very impressive, but that all the while through high school and college dual meets, you were undefeated?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
What were your events in high school and college?
Most of my life, I swam the butterflies and the IMs, but those were kind of taken over by some Mary T. Maher and Tracy Calkins. And so I switched to the freestyles, and that's what I won in the Olympics.
So in a dual meet, that's meaning your high school team, your college team, and one other, no one ever defeated you.
Right.
Nicely done. Nicely done. In the 1984 Olympics, Remind us, where were the 84 Olympics?
They were in Los Angeles. And I was very lucky that in 1984, the Eastern Bloc countries decided to boycott those Olympics because, remember, we had boycotted the 1980 Olympics. And I made that Olympic team, and we didn't get to go. But what was so wonderful about not having them there is that we knew that they were doping, that they were cheating. And so I knew I was going to have a shot at winning.
And it was what stands out in my mind from recollection in that era. It was the East Germans at the top of the list, right? Weren't they always the suspect class?
Oh, I mean, as soon as the wall came down, they actually kept very good records. So we know, not, suspect, but we know for sure. And what was sad is at the time, we were expected to be gracious losers. We were expected to just suck it up and get that second place. And I always felt like that the sports governing bodies, that the adults in the room should have been doing something about it to make sure that it was fair.
Nancy, do you go so far as to put the current controversies over the ability or right of a transgendered female to compete with other females? Does that strike you as being similar to what you competed against in matches against, say, the East Germans?
It's not similar morally. It's
right.
Not similar from a cheating perspective. They're not trying to cheat. But from a biological perspective, from a science perspective, male puberty gives a body much more than any amount of drug that the East Germans could take. So my East German competitors were a little bit better than we were, but they were nowhere near the best men. Whereas the gap between what male puberty gives somebody is about, in swimming, it's about 11%. And so just from a biological standpoint is a apt comparison.
Is there not a means of testosterone reduction that can compensate for that and level the playing field?
There may be in some events, particularly really long distance events where VO2 max is really important, like marathons. We've got some open water swimming events, but all the events in the pool are too short for that to really take effect. But in sports requiring strength and power and, that reducing testosterone, even for long periods of time, doesn't reduce the benefits that somebody gets from male puberty. And I have to say, this is actually very similar to what we do in drug testing, which is that in drug testing, if somebody tests twice for performance enhancing drugs in the steroid category, they are banned for life. Not because we want to sort of scold them, even if it's not their fault, even if they took them unknowingly. But we do it because we know that after twice that they're going to have impacts on their body, they're going to last a lifetime, that are going to give an unfair advantage, even if they stop taking them.
On a number of occasions recently, I've spoken to experts like yourself about the case of Penn swimmer Lia Thomas, and I always ask the question, can we be both fair and inclusive? I am coming to the conclusion that the answer is no, that we can't be. What's your answer to that question?
I would say for all the events that are in a pool, it looks like no. I wish it was otherwise.
Right.
I'm part of a group called the Women's Sports Policy Working Group, and we've been trying to find that middle way. But since we got started, the science has gone along. And as you said, you've talked to other people that in the shorter the event, the less likely it is that somebody's going to be able to mitigate what male puberty gives somebody.
I've buried the lead. In your capacity as a civil rights attorney, you represent 16 members of the Penn women's swimming team and their families. You sent a letter to the University of Pennsylvania as well as the Ivy League on February 3rd, captioned, "We request that Penn and the Ivy League do not engage in litigation to alter the NCAA's new eligibility guidelines for transgender athletes." And I was so interested in reading that communication because the way in which the Lia Thomas case has been presented, I think, to the national media thus far had been one of all of her teammates being lockstep in their support of her and her right to compete. And I just intuitively always wondered whether that was really the case. Tell me about the sentiment on the team vis-a-vis her right to compete.
Whenever the swimmers have expressed any discomfort or any second thoughts or want to talk about it with leaders at Penn or with their coaches, or they are shut down right away. There's no room for them to be able to say anything. They've been told that if they speak out, that they will never get a job again. That corporate America will Google their name, see that and say, "Oh, transphobe, we don't want that." And that they've been told that they can't do anything about Leah walking around the showers. They've been told that they can't. And when Penn initially said that Leah was going to be on the women's swimming team, Penn sort of marched in several people and sort of made an announcement, "This is it. This is what's happening, folks." And then offered the women therapy if they were having a problem with it.
So how many of the women on that team are unsupportive of Leah's right to compete, say, in the Ivy League championship, which is coming up a week from this weekend?
Well, it's a lot that are not supportive. 16 people were ready to, be supportive. We actually cut down the number just a bit, just in case some people waffled, and I didn't want to have to revise the number. But it's at least 16 that what they don't want is, we ask USA Swimming and all of the parents and everybody at Penn and the Ivy League was really involved with it. We had a petition that went out, and it was signed by over 150 Olympians that said that USA Swimming, when they come up with guidelines for determining whether or not somebody's eligible, that they needed to prioritize fairness for cis women in sports. And they did. That's exactly what they did. And so these women, this is not at all the first thing that they did. They were part of writing a press release that went to the NCAA. They have been very active. Their families have been very active.
16 of how many total members on the team?
There are 41 total members on the team.
Okay, and what I'm taking away from you, Nancy, is that 16 might be a little light, that the number actually might be larger than 16. And I'm also suspecting that maybe there are even more who are supportive of the position that you advanced, who perhaps just didn't want to be associated with it. But that's speculation on my part. What I found to be most compelling in terms of the communication that you sent to Penn and to the Ivy League is where you note that Leah was able in the rankings to bounce from number 462 when competing as a male to go to number 1 as a female. Expand on that.
Yeah, that's what male puberty gives somebody, or these the strength and the lung capacity and the height and the bigger hands that cannot be rolled back. And so if somebody like Kayla Dressel were to decide they were going to be transgender and wanted to compete in the women's category, and in the sprints, there's a bigger gap than in the distance events. So let's say Caleb Dressel was able to roll back hypothetically in this 12%, I would think that was fair, going from number one to number one, or number, 50 to 50, or 100, whatever. But to go, I mean, that just shows you that Leah has not rolled back their male puberty advantage to be able to go from 400 at Leah's best event, which was the mile at 1650 in swimming. She was ranked 32nd when she competed as a male, and now is ranked really highly. It's just even the difference between 32nd and first. Any coach will tell you that is an enormous bounce. That is something that, if it happened in a cisgendered person, you'd be wondering if they were doing drugs, if it happened that quickly.
So in this communication, you say to Penn and to the Ivy League, please don't challenge the new NCAA eligibility guidelines. Have you received an answer?
We have not received an answer. We didn't receive an answer. We just said, we got your communication, but it didn't say, if we agree or not agree. But, what's particularly to me upsetting is that back in 2020, we sent a letter to the president, the athletic director, the head of Ivy League, and all the Ivy Leagues about how they were not living up to what Title IX requires in not discriminating against women just in their athletic department. Penn, in particular, needs to add 200 women to its athletic department, and they haven't done anything for cis women to add to the athletic department to give women more opportunities to be able to go to Penn and to be able to compete at that high level. And here they were ready to go to bat for Leah to be able to, work with the ACLU or work with different organizations to be supportive of Leah being able to compete. We want them to go to bat for cis women just to be able to, you need to create probably 6 or 8 new teams. That's how far behind that Penn is behind behind what Title IX would require.
I can understand the sensitivities of this, especially at Penn, which is an environment that I know well. I'm an alumnus of the law school there, and my family has other connections to Penn. I can understand that the 16 or more that you represent probably are feeling very vulnerable, right? That they would be on the wrong side of this kind of a public conversation, and that it could follow them.
Yes. I mean, can you imagine going to work out every day and going to training camp and having thoughts and feelings, very strong ones, and not be able to communicate them, not be able to talk even amongst your peers, to really feel shut down about the whole thing? It's really
I
hard
understand that.
them.
I understand that, but I'm thinking of something else. I'm also thinking of being cast as transphobic if you're unsupportive of Lia Thomas's right to compete in the Ivy League championship in another week, when I don't think you're transphobic because you're asserting some of the things that Nancy Hogshead-Makar is saying. But if I were a student, I'd be very worried about that vulnerability and how I would be perceived by classmates on campus.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that calling somebody transphobic is a way to shut them down. It's a way to marginalize whatever their opinion is. Look, you can be supportive of trans people, and you want them to thrive in life, and you want them to be who they are, and you don't want any discrimination going on in employment, in the classroom, in public accommodations. But to recognize that there is biology, that there is a difference between men and women, and that there are a very few places where biology really matters. And competitive sports is one of those. In competitive sports, we need to make sure that women have equal opportunities to compete. I mean, think about it, Michael. It could have been that the law developed so that there was one team and whoever made it, right? So in the chemistry department or in the English department, that is it, right? Whoever gets the highest SAT, GPA, right? Whoever makes it into the classroom, that's who gets to be there. But that's not in sports. If you had that system of not having sex segregated sports, you would almost never see women being on the teams. I mean, the reason why there's no women in the NBA and the NFL and baseball and hockey is not because women aren't allowed. It's not because of they're not excluded. It's because biologically they don't have male puberty advantage.
The Women's Sports Policy Working Group mission statement says the following: our mission is to affirm the legal permissibility of separate girls and women's competitive sports teams while including all trans girls and trans women under the girls and women's sports umbrella. We reject both the effort to exclude trans girls and trans women from girls and women's sport and the effort to disadvantage females by forcing them to compete against some trans athletes with male sex-linked physical advantages. There is a middle way. What is the middle way?
Well, we were hoping that there would be a way to mitigate the sex-linked advantage, that if somebody, we were very supportive of the NCAA rule when we first wrote our materials. As science has changed, we've had to change our position. But one of the things that has not changed is the social construct of sport is very different from the competitive side of sport. So the social construct of sport is going to practices, stretching together, eating meals together, being friends, and traveling, etc. And then there's the competition part, which is 5% of sport. So what we're asking for is a distinction just in that 5% of sport, so that somebody can engage in the social construct of sport, right? What it gives you is a community to belong to, but recognize that when it comes to the competition, that there needs to be a women-only space. There's no reason why, like we think of having Leah be able to participate in lane 9. One of the Coaches Association actually came up with this one, having them compete in lane 9, having them swim really fast, and everybody would cheer for them, and they would get on their own podium, and they would set their own records and be heralded and lauded for who it is that they're being, and they're the first one out there. But when they start taking away opportunities and people can look at it and say it's not fair, then all that goes away. It doesn't do the transgender movement any favors.
Nancy, final question. As things stand now, the records set by Leah, will they stand? If nothing else transpires, will the records that she set this season stand in the record books? And if that's the case, I take it you want something done about that?
Yeah, we haven't talked about doing anything about that particularly, but because they've been so focused on trying to get the rules changed to participate in the Ivy Championships and in the NCAAs. It just stands as unfairness. It stands as, Leah being able to be 6'4" with enormous lungs and longer arms and legs and the strength that comes, I would hope that our sports governing bodies would be able to not use sport as a platform to express trans hate, right? We don't want that, but find some way to recognize what Leah has done without taking anything away from the girls and women that are competing right now.
3-time gold medalist, 1 silver medal, Nancy Hogshead-Makar. Thank you so much for your information and assessment of this controversial situation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. My husband is really happy right now.
Keep him. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it very much.